Hello, techies. Welcome to the Tech Times Africa podcast, where we'll bring you the latest stories on tech and startups in Africa. Catch us every Thursday at 10 a.m. WAT on techtimesafrica.podbean.com. Let us know what you think by giving us feedback in the comments or on our socials. Now, on with the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tech Times Africa podcast. This week, we have a number of stories from Africa. We will talk a bit about some fundraising, fastest growing tech cities in Africa. And there are a number of topics as always. Karen, how are you doing today?
Hey, Kelvin, I'm doing great. I always love Mondays because we get to unpack really awesome tech stories. When I think about where we're going as a continent and as a globe in terms of technology, I always get really excited. So how about you?
Yeah, I am. Over the last week, there have been a number of developments. Obviously, we'll talk about the ones that happened in Africa, but globally as well, there have been a number of announcements from tech giants like Google and Microsoft, especially pushing the boundaries of what AI can do. And some of those are really interesting. I would like to see how those play out in terms of how we leverage some of these technologies to build solutions for Africa as well. I digress. So let's get into today's topics. Starting with Valu. Valu secures Egyptian exchange listing approval after 27 million capital injection. So Valu has raised $27 million in funding, and one of their first moves is to get listed on the Egyptian exchange. Of course, we are beginning to see some companies considering this, like Flutterwave. We saw a couple of, I think it's over a month ago at this point, they were considering listing on the Nigerian stock exchange. I remember there was a South African company as well a couple of weeks ago, and now we are seeing Valu trying to do this in Egypt. So there seems to be like a growing push for startups to start to get listings on exchanges. So this is quite curious. I mean, this is the third time I'm seeing this in the last few weeks. So it's something to pay attention to.
Yeah, 100%. And two things are exciting me about this is, first of all, we are seeing more movement within the northern side of Africa. People doing more startup news are coming from there, so that's exciting. Number two, I think this is a trend that we are seeing, especially in the fintech space, where guys are becoming listed and being taken more seriously in the economy, and it also boosts user confidence in the companies. And we are seeing like that move from just being a startup to being a very seriously taken organization when they're doing these things. And so it's a trend, as you've said, that I think we need to start looking at, and I think other fintech owners need to start taking note of. Maybe even other startups that are not necessarily in the fintech space. This is a sign that African fintechs are maturing and they're preparing for acquisitions. So that's a very exciting trend.
Yeah, a keyword you dropped there was maturity. And we are seeing a lot of that in Africa, and even maturity of our local economy. So these startups are considering listings on the local stock exchanges, not necessarily on the US stock exchange. So we are seeing a lot of maturity in the ecosystem, and it's really nice to watch this play out. And as you mentioned, seeing some news from Northern Africa is always quite interesting. So whenever I see news from Northern Africa, it's always like massive deals, even though they can be relatively quiet. So exciting times ahead, exciting times.
Yeah. And talking about funding, Carrot Credit has raised 4.2 million in seed money to scale its crypto and stock-based lending in Africa. So another fintech story, which I think goes back to what we were saying about maturing, and we're seeing investor trust growing in the fintech space in Africa. And Carrot Credit is doing something very interesting because they lend against digital assets like stocks, CFTs, crypto. So they look at digital investment assets and they lend you money with that as the basis, which is very interesting. I don't know if you've seen any other company that is doing that.
It is quite interesting, really. I haven't seen anyone else, at least in Africa, doing this. And I am very curious about what it is they are doing. So actually, I'm thinking about downloading the app to see how this actually plays out in practice, right? At least from a user's point of view. But I guess people are beginning to realize that these digital assets are here to stay. So they are now thinking, okay, how can we build solutions with these digital assets? And this is one use case here playing out where a user would use their actual money to buy these digital assets. So why not use that in quotes as collateral? It's not necessarily collateral, but then these users are taking loan based on these digital assets they have. So it's a very interesting application of things like stocks that are quite volatile and other digital assets like cryptocurrency. But the 4.2 million they have gotten in seed funding is a lot of confidence from investors that, okay, there's actually some value and there's actually a market for this. And that shows in the amount of funding they've gotten.
Yeah, and I wonder if the product is an answer to a question that the millennial and Gen Z generation raise, in that our parents were able to secure loans as a result of assets like land and houses, but we're seeing more and more people are unable to purchase these kinds of assets. If you look at the millennial generation going backwards towards Gen Z, the millennials, number one, are like, where is the money to even invest in buying land that I can then use as collateral for traditional loans? And then we have the Gen Zs who are like, I don't see the use of spending so much money on a house or on land when I can just rent and then just invest in other things. So I think this is answering that question to the people who now are starting to gain purchasing power, which is the Gen Z millennial age groups, and they are not so much in the traditional form of collateral and assets, but you will find them perhaps here and there investing in things like crypto, right? And so I wonder if their product is an answer to that question.
You make a solid point there. It is an answer to that question because I don't know about in Kenya, but in Nigeria, if you try to purchase something like land, it's a process I won't go into, like the jam process that I went into last week. So I will be avoiding that. But it's quite difficult, really. It is really difficult. So it's just easier to create an account on these crypto exchanges, buy cryptocurrency, whether it's Bitcoin or whatever. And I mean, if this now allows you access to credit, allows you access to loans, why not? Obviously, real estate, we all know, has a lot of value in it. But then we are beginning to see things like Bitcoin as well have a lot of value. Yes, they are very volatile and there are risks that come with that. But we are seeing millennials and Gen Z taking more of a chance on these digital assets. So Carrot Credit is definitely tapping into that market. Moving on, Lagos is ranked the world's fastest growing tech city in 2025. Dealroom.co, a Netherlands-based global provider of data and intelligence, wrote this report. They ranked 288 cities across 69 countries. There are a lot of things they check: population size, GDP per capita, cost of living, and Lagos is the fastest growing tech city. Some of it is quite obvious because there are a lot of very massive startups that have come from Lagos. Jumia, Flutterwave, Moneypoint, OP, and InterSwitch, all of them are headquartered in Lagos and they are all unicorns at this point. So you know there's a lot of growth coming from that space. But I think a lot of it also has to do with the population. I've been to Lagos a couple of times. It's one of the places where you can feel that there are a lot of people in this place. They have a population of over 21 million. Then it starts to make sense whenever you're in Lagos that, yeah, there are a lot of people here. So yeah, It's an interesting report. I want to know what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, first of all, Nigeria, you guys are doing too much. You need to calm down. The fastest growing city in the world, not in Africa, in the world. And you guys were being compared to cities in India. And as we know, India is growing really fast, especially in the tech space.
Yeah.
So when I see you're beating cities in India, I'm like, what? You guys are doing too much. But I think it doesn't come as a shock to me because as we have been talking about startups and tech in Africa, Nigeria has always shown up. And you have what this report is calling unicorn companies. So Jumia, your best friend, Flutterwave, Opay, InterSwitch, these are startups that are doing extremely well in the tech space. And it's one of the reasons why you guys are showing up on this list. And I think it's clear that there's a lot of really good innovation that's coming up in Nigeria. Now, do you have some systemic issues? Absolutely, 100% you do. But clearly, there's some things that you are doing right. I've said Kenya is the Silicon Valley of Africa. I'm starting to think.
Where are they on this list? I can't see you clearly.
I think you guys are cementing yourself as Africa's startup capital, right? Like Lagos is now becoming Africa's startup capital. Even the amount of investor confidence that we are seeing with businesses in Lagos tells you that it is Africa's startup capital. I fully surrender to that. There's a lot of momentum in Nigeria and obviously Lagos being at the center of that. Yeah.
I mean, going down the list, in the top 20, you have Johannesburg at 8 and Kampala, Uganda at 20th. So it's also interesting to see other African countries. I did think that if it came down to it, like South Africa would be, higher on this list because they also have a very good ecosystem. Of course, I'm biased. Nigeria would always be at the forefront of it. Well, moving down the list, you talk about sub-Saharan Africa, we have Lagos, then Johannesburg, South Africa, Kampala, Uganda. We have been talking about the growth that has been going on in Uganda. So it's good to see that this reflects in metrics like this. Dakar, Senegal is in fourth, and then Accra, Ghana in fifth. So that's quite interesting because for Senegal and Ghana, we haven't really seen much in recent times from those two countries, but apparently a lot of innovation is going on there, so a lot of growth is happening there. So yeah, it's also good to see all these other countries make up this list as well.
Yeah, and it worries me because when you look at the list, they have a list for the world's biggest, most established startup ecosystems, right? Now, on that list, Lagos is still first, and then Johannesburg, and then Cape Town, and then Nairobi, Kenya. So, Nairobi is on the list of the biggest, most established, but it's nowhere on the list of growing. Yeah, which means that something has happened and it has stalled and it has stopped developing. So I think one of the things that we will have to think about as a country is what is it that is startling growth for startups and tech innovations in Kenya.
Yeah, some of it you have pointed out in previous episodes, things like regulation, taxation, and things like that, that kind of discourage sometimes growth. Maybe it's a time where as an ecosystem you would have to think about, okay, what is it that we are doing right and what are we doing wrong, and try to do more things that you're doing right than wrong.
Okay, let's move on. So, we are continuing on the path of collaborations within the connectivity space in Africa. And this time, Mimosa Networks is partnering with MTN to drive wireless connectivity across Africa. And I want to hear more about this because MTN is not really in Kenya, but I believe it's one of the biggest telecoms in Nigeria, right? And they have partnered with Mimosa so that they can start bringing in more wireless connectivity. How will that play out? Because this is the second or third partnership we have seen in connectivity, and we're going to see another collaborative effort happening later on in this podcast.
Okay, so from what I gather, Mimosa networks, are they based in Kenya?
No.
Okay.
And if they are a player, they're a very small player because I've never heard of them in Kenya.
Yeah, I've also never heard about them before, but they must be doing something right to get the attention of a big player like MTN across Africa. MTN is from South Africa, I believe, but they are also very massive in Nigeria. Yeah, this partnership just continues to add to the growing list of partnerships we are seeing with telecommunication companies in Africa. Recently, we talked about Airtel and Starlink, and Safaricom is also looking for a satellite partnership, and this just adds to the list. And we are seeing that the borders are beginning to open up. So these telecom companies are thinking of partnerships that can increase their reach across Africa. And in this case, MTN struggles in rural areas. And I believe that is where they gain in terms of this partnership, because Mimosa Network is building wireless technology that is also fast, because that's the issue with wireless. When you start to go to like rural areas, it starts to falter a bit. Mimosa seem to be a specialist in this, and that's what MTN gains. And then, of course, what Mimosa gains is MTN's market and a lot of their customer base. So I believe it works for both parties. So it makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that they deliver fiber like speeds, but it's over the air through unlicensed spectrum. So my technology knowledge does not allow me to understand what this is, but I think I'm going to definitely do some research on it in terms of what that means. But clearly, it's going to help them serve the rural spaces better, which, as you've said, is where MTN wants more help. So, definitely, I think we will continue to see this trend of collaboration, especially in the connectivity space, because so much of Africa doesn't have good speeds, good internet, and yet it's something that is really required for the future of work and everyday life. So, yeah, definitely. I think this is not the last collaboration that we will see in the connectivity space.
It's definitely not, because Safaricom is looking for a partner. So at least we know we will get that at some point. I'm sure we'll get that one at least, and then some other ones. So, yeah, let's see how these telcos continue to bridge the gap between the rural and urban areas. I'm all for it. Moving to social media, Tanzania blocks X, citing national security. And the situation was that the official Tanzania police force account was hacked. The hackers posted that the president of Tanzania had died. I mean, you can imagine the kind of panic that would cause. So the government officials went on a debunking spree to, say this is not true. And then they blocked access to X. Obviously, we know when it comes to news and spreading news, it's X a lot of people go to. So they blocked access to X so that this information doesn't spread. As of now, I don't know whether this access has been restored or not. And of course, there are growing concerns of the internet crackdown across Africa that we have seen for the last couple of years at this point. And this is a very delicate one, because on the one hand, you can see their points, you can see why they would go that route. But then when you have a previous history of shutting down internet or internet services and doing what can be perceived as restricting free speech, it weakens your arguments for national security.
Yeah, it's a weird one, because I think on the one side that was an illegal act, right? Hacking a police account is illegal, and then spreading that kind of news, especially when it comes to the president, because the president is a sovereign symbol of your country. So even some of the things that we're seeing happening to our president in Kenya, they're not really right because of the symbolism of who a president is to the sovereignty of a country.
Yeah.
So I think we need to first of all acknowledge that that was just illegal. However, I also do think that free speech is something that should be respected. But usually, my question is, at what point does free speech become illegal? And also, why is it that with African governments, the first reaction is always shut things down? And I think it comes back to a long history of government controlling media, where, like, for Kenya, we had one media station, KBC, and the news was always only about the president, and it started with a song that praises the president, right? Now you can close Twitter, but that doesn't stop TikTok from continuing to spread the news. So I think the way they handled it, I don't know. But there's also a lot of gray area within the policies of what is free speech and what is outright illegal.
Yeah, it's a very strange one for me. I always feel that for something like Twitter, they have community notes that you can use to tackle that. If people are spreading that news, you can literally use community notes and report, okay, this is false. And then there are just other ways that they could have gone about it. But we continue to see this in Africa. Like you said, there was a hack. It's illegal, but on the other side, you have a duty to train the officials to not get hacked, because most likely it went through something like social engineering where someone wasn't careful about the information he gave out and this happened. Or it could even possibly be internal, because with these things, it's not really clear. I mean, there's not much to go on, so we can only speculate. But yeah, the response of always shutting down, that does impede on the fundamental human rights. Because of how often African governments resort to that, we need to have a conversation about the other ways to tackle these things beyond internet shutdown, because I don't think that really solves anything. There are just too many other ways to get on the internet, to get on those services you're trying to shut down, even with the shutdown. So I think we need to think about better solutions than that.
Yes, and you see, it wasn't like, for example, what is being spread is causing war. I would understand shutting it down, right? Let's say people are just speaking war and they're organizing war on Twitter. I understand you shutting it down.
Yeah.
It was an overreaction in my point of view, but let's move on. Back to Nigeria and them doing too much. China is going to establish a vehicle station in Nigeria. I was looking at this and I was just excited because they are creating a manufacturing plant. Now, I'm not happy with the fact that it's coming from another country. I wish it was something that is for Nigeria by Nigerians, but it's still a move in the right direction where they're planning to establish an electric vehicle manufacturing plant. And there was a meeting last week between your country and the Chinese ambassador to try and create more collaboration between the two countries so that they could leverage Nigeria's solid mineral sector. We were discussing electrical vehicles a couple of weeks ago, where Kenya is setting up stations for charging vehicles. So if we can have a manufacturing plant within the continent, that's a plus for Nigeria, but also for the rest of the continent.
Yeah, I believe this is a positive, really, because at the end of the day, you need investments in your country. Not a situation like crude oil that we have a lot of in Nigeria. It is not processed here, it is exported abroad and refined there, and then we buy it back, which is a very weird way of doing business. But that's kind of how it has been done for a while. I know obviously in recent times, Dangote refinery has been set up to process some of that locally. This is what should have been done all along. And of course, we know there are certain conversations that have to do with why, for example, that situation happened as it happened. But in this case, China is setting up manufacturing plants in Nigeria, which means this will create some jobs around the plants, within the plants. Of course, with electric vehicles, we know they are a more sustainable way of making vehicles these days in terms of clean energy. So it's a net plus for me. I hope this is actually followed through. I hope it wouldn't be one of those things that gets abandoned somewhere or breaks down while the deal is going on, or maybe they start the plant and then they have to stop halfway. I just hope that they follow through and finish it. Then it becomes a net positive. But yeah, at the moment we have to be optimistic, I guess, about this. Oh yeah, maybe I don't sound as optimistic because government projects have a way of slowing down in Nigeria, but I'm hoping that because the Chinese are involved, the push would see this project to completion. So it's a plus, and I believe once this plant is set up in Nigeria, then manufacturing begins in Nigeria, and we can start to export to other African nations, global countries as well. So yeah, it's a positive.
Yeah, I agree. It is a positive and it will create, I agree, a lot of employment. And I also think for any founder, entrepreneur, or tech person who listens to our podcast, this is a great opportunity for you to start looking for innovations around electric vehicles, from software to logistics to support services. Those solar based charging stations that I am going to start in Nigeria. Anyway, it's an opportunity that I think if you are innovative and creative, the fact that this is a space that the government seems to be moving into, then it's time to start innovating towards that direction. So if the vehicles start to be manufactured, what are some things that's around an electric vehicle that you can take advantage of as a founder and an entrepreneur in Africa?
Yep. That is a very good line of thoughts to have at the moment. There are a lot of opportunities that are coming with electric vehicles. For a while, I doubted, especially with Nigeria, we do not have enough power to start with. So I wonder how this will be figured out. But these people that are pouring in millions upon millions into these projects, I believe they do have an idea of how this would be powered. So yeah, I look forward to seeing this. Moving on, Uganda launches Internet for All program. And of course, just like previous topics we had on this podcast, we continue to see strides being made to connect people to the internet, to connect people to their friends, family across borders. And Uganda is taking a step in this direction as well. A local telecom business, Somba Solutions, and an infrastructure provider, BG Titan Group, are developing an Internet for All prototype network that should bring internet to as many people in Uganda as possible. And I believe this is a positive. We also touched on Uganda on the list of fastest growing tech cities in the world. I mean, they were 20th on the list out of 288 cities. So this particular policy, this move is one of the things that I believe is beginning to bring Uganda more and more into the global spotlight.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of talk with public-private sector coming together and creating solutions for people. And I think this is a good example of that, public-private opportunities, because we are seeing their communications agency driving this conversation, and then we are seeing private companies coming together. And I think that's a very positive move because now each of these three companies will be able to offer world class connectivity with shared infrastructure. Because I think one of the most expensive things with connectivity is the infrastructure that goes into it. If we can focus on collaboration, then we can be able to offer really great services and accelerate connectivity for our countries. And by accelerating connectivity, accelerate innovation. I recently saw, like, for example, in Kenya, more than 1 billion shillings was earned last year by digital skill export, right? So the online workspace, it was bringing in quite a bit of money for Kenya. And I think these are some of the things that we can expect when connectivity is great. So I do believe that what Uganda has done will probably set an example for other countries where we bring in connectivity, and the government creates an approach for inclusion and boosting connectivity, because when connectivity is good, our education is better, our e-health, things like e-commerce will grow a lot better, things like the digital online workspace where we're able to export our skills and professions without leaving our countries is another thing that will grow. So yeah, I think this is definitely a really good move. Uganda is definitely becoming a space to watch. Now it's becoming my second Zambia because I'm seeing them make a few really cool moves.
You said it all, and I agree with everything you've said. And I think we'll leave it there for this episode. Thank you for joining us. Do have a great week and see you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Tech Tides Africa podcast. Remember, leave a comment or share with your friends. We'll see you next Thursday at the same time and place you get your podcast. Until then, stay well.